Hurricane Ian has destroyed large swaths of the state of Florida. It has killed an unknown number of people, left thousands of people homeless. People are still without power. People are destitute. People are in horrible conditions. And the federal government is working with the DeSantis administration in Florida to disseminate relief across the state. But our vice president made some comments that have alarmed some people. And it wasn't just the vice president. Occupy Democrats tweeted a picture of Mar-a-Lago that survived the storm and said, Ian, you have one job. If a large Republican organization made a comment about a hurricane not destroying a Democratic former president's home, people would be horrified. No one in the media cares, right? And Kamala Harris has made the statement, the vice president said that disseminating the relief is going to be determined by skin color, by equity, she said. That's her new framing of how you frame this new bigotry that is replacing the old bigotry and the old racism. You see it in a number of areas, admissions to universities and other things, where people that if you object to it, as a white or Asian student, if you object to being discriminated against, well, you're a bigot, right? And people are objecting. The Biden administration has failed, has been asked, but refused to answer what she meant by it. The director of FEMA said that they are not going to disseminate relief based on race. Instead, what they're going to work to is to tear down the barriers to communities of color and poor people of all colors getting access to FEMA aid, and that would be wonderful, right? We have clearly in this country did a tremendous disservice in underserved minority communities for centuries, oppressed minority communities for centuries, but what we don't need in this country is we don't need to replace old racism with a new bigotry. And the government shouldn't say, you know what, you're going to get some relief because you're black, you're white, you're not going to get relief. Instead, what we should be doing is trying to put everyone on the same plane and deliver the relief equally, not based on race, not based on wealth, not based on anything but the fact whether or not you're an American citizen and you've suffered as a result of this storm.
I would say that at some point, that's what we should do. But for generations, decades, when there were natural disasters in America, communities of color, black and brown in particular, were tremendously and greatly underserved. When FEMA would come in and government assistance programs would come in to assist those who were the victims of such natural disasters, they focused on getting the best of quality of services to a white, affluent neighborhoods. And they purposely neglected the poor black and brown ones and gave them the crumbs that was left on the table. So what the vice president is saying is a painful truth that this time we're going to make sure that communities of color and impoverished communities will receive the same exact quality of service that affluent white neighborhoods have been receiving. That's scary to white people in affluent neighborhoods because now somebody has truly uncovered the truth and is revealing it to the public and saying, now you got to share the big pie that you've been eating from FEMA from day one with these natural disasters. I understand that at some point we should do it strictly based on the facts of all of us being American citizens and spread it just across the board. But until America addresses the evil of her past and puts corrective measures in place to help recidify and clean up the historical damage that it created, then we can come forward together and say how we do this together collectively and what is right. But America should not be allowed to just say, let's forget the past, ignore what took place, and start from today. Baby. You wouldn't tell members of the Israeli community that. You don't tell those in Ukraine that. You don't tell those who were suffering and murdered in Rwanda that. So why would America do it right here? We have to remember that today was built from yesterday, and tomorrow's built on what we do today, but we have to address the historical wrongs and then move forward in the present.
You know, it's always interesting the way you frame stuff absolutely dishonestly to try to make it is beautiful language, and it's about fairness. We've had affirmative action in this country since the 70s, right? We had just with, when you look at FEMA relief is designed largely to help uninsured people, which when you look at a breakdown on a racial breakdown is already bias towards people of color and people that are poor, right? And the truth is, in America, when you have poor people, there is more poor people, white poor people than any, but there's also more white people. On a per capita basis, the communities of color have more poverty. And what we should be doing is dividing FEMA to focus on the people that need it and need the relief. And the reality is, it's just the cronies and the big businesses of both parties. And the Democrats have been in control for a while, and we're in control for the most of the last 2 centuries.
About FEMA?
No, this thing is,
because
you don't want to have a discussion about the horrifying nature of the vice president's comment.
To the American people.
It is. She said she's going to divide.
Does more than just address natural disasters. Charles, you and I both know that FEMA is involved in Homeland Security. FEMA is involved in other secret governmental agencies that ain't got nothing to do with natural disasters. That's the image portrayed to the common public. But you and I both know FEMA's involved in some very nefarious things. Look, man, we have to be honest with the American people. And I'm going to tell you something, Charles. The day is coming in America where one natural disaster after another, soon FEMA won't have a dollar to give nobody. America's going broke, and America is lying to the world and to the American people that we're financially stable and successful. The day is coming to where our economy, I believe, is going to crash. And when that happens, we just can't crank up the printing press like we do it during COVID. We just can't crank up the printing press like we did during the housing crisis and the Obama administration tried to fix it. Look, man, America financially is going broke, and natural disasters will take place, and the public must be prepared, affluent communities and poor ones, for the government to finally come forth and tell you, FEMA don't have no money to give you. We're bankrupt. You got to fend for yourselves.
Well, the economy has already crashed. We just don't know it because the mainstream media is lying to us to protect the Biden administration. 2, when you talk about white affluence, there are scores of poor white people in this country, but you don't talk about those people. What you talk about is white affluence as if all white people have this holistic, wealthy, upper middle class existence, and it's not true. And the truth is that FEMA, if you look at a breakdown of their aid, it's not directed at white communities. This is just a nonsense that you've created to justify and avoid talking about the vice president's comments. What we don't want in America, any reasonable, non-bigoted person, is you don't want an America where relief or admissions to universities or anything is decided by the skin color, period. And you can look beyond that, right? You can look and you can say, well, who's needy? Who's had this? Who's had this? Universities can do it. They don't. They just base it all on skin color now, and there's tremendously...
And that's a con game. No. That's a con game,
I know you don't want to talk about the vice president, but
Charles,
what the vice president said was horrifying. America shouldn't decide anything by the color of skin. In fact, it's unconstitutional. And I know we did it for centuries, and that was disgusting.
Charles, quit lying.
It's disgusting now? Okay,
quit
sure.
Lying.
You lied this whole segment, but I'm
lying. It's
lying.
Unconstitutional.
Please interrupt me again.
When did racism become unconstitutional in America?
It's been unconstitutional for a while.
And them lying hypocrite founding fathers, when they said we the people, by the people,
they just meant
for the
white
people, they meant we white people, for white people, by white people. It's been a constitutional practice during Jim Crow legislation and segregation to discriminate against black people in America. So the Constitution was never supposed to be given to black people. And in fact, remember, the Constitution said that black men and black people were 3/5 of a human being. So when they wrote that Constitution, they never thought about us and including us in the process. So that wasn't written for us.
There is absolutely no doubt that the horrifying nature of the institution of slavery won out during the framing debates, right? There were abolitionists who were against it, and obviously there were states that did not approve it, but obviously that won out, and it's disgusting. But when you talk about history, right, how about a little presentism, right, as opposed to applying the values of today to people 300 years ago? Let's talk about today. And we've had affirmative action in this country for decades.
It was a joke.
With no end in sight, right? And the thing is now, people are just blatant about it. When Abraham Kendi X tweeted about white people lying about their race to get into universities that they don't deserve to, he had to delete the tweet because he realized it contravened his narrative that people of color can't get into universities.
I don't support affirmative action.
What people don't want to do, right? What our public education system doesn't want to do, they don't want to fix the achievement gap. gap. They don't want to fix how we're underserving communities of color. They just want to have
Charles,
different
I
rules.
don't
And it's the
agree.
same thing with
No,
FEMA.
I do.
You don't
I
want me to talk,
support
but you're supporting
affirmative
putting
action.
people in the front of the line
I
because of the
just
color
told
of
you
their
I don't
skin.
support affirmative
okay,
action.
well then why are you defending the
So let's
Vice
talk
President's
about it.
comments?
Let's talk about it.
The Vice President,
The
parents
reason
went
why
to
I do
Stanford,
not support affirmative
wealthy
action.
life, but she talks
Let me
about
tell you
her.
something, Charles.
Go ahead.
Go do the research.
Okay.
Affirmative action was a trick played on black people. Let me tell you why. Because when they wrote the 1964 civil rights legislation into office, into law, they used the word minority. But what they didn't tell black people that they would include white females as minority, Arabs, Asians, Indians, non-whites would all be minorities.
God forbid we
so what
strive
happened?
for
Wait a minute.
equality for all.
Wait a minute. What happened? Black people who fought, bled, and died and sacrificed their lives and their bodies to bring affirmative action law into existence were the least benefactors of it in America. The number one financial benefactors from contracts with city, state, and local governments through affirmative action were white females, not black people. White females. So look, affirmative action was a trick. Black people did not benefit as a whole from affirmative action. A few select, hand-picked elite Negroes benefited, but the masses of black people never benefited from that. So that's why I don't support affirmative action. And I'm gonna tell you something about universities, man. Universities are trying to get it right, but they're going about it in all the wrong ways. Our universities are no longer schools that teach independent thought. Our universities now are schools that teach what is politically correct, and whatever political power is in power in America or has a tremendous influence among the public, that's what the universities are pushing in these schools now. It used to be institutions of higher learning. Now they're institutions of higher programming.
Okay, but what do you think about the Vice President's position that your placement in line to get federal aid from the hurricane should be based on skin color? Do you think it's right or wrong?
She didn't mean it like that.
That's exactly how she said
What
it.
she was saying, poor communities
No.
No. What she's saying is that poor communities should receive top priority when it comes to resources because they're the ones who so desperately need it the most, and they're the ones who, through natural disasters in history, have been greatly underserved.
What she
That's
was
what she was saying.
very blatantly in her chuckling, condescending, absurdist manner was that the government was going to decide who got what based on the color of their skin.
That's not what she was saying.
That should offend
That's
everyone.
not what she was saying.
I want a fair America. I want a more equitable America, but we don't need to replace the old racism with new bigotry. It's short-sighted, it's stupid, and it's going to create more division and fix nothing.
Let me say this. America, as bad as you want to escape it,
what am I trying to escape?
at some point, you're going to reap what you sowed. And that's the problem with America.
What did I sow?
You, as an individual, didn't do anything, Charles.
Okay.
The present generation of white people today are not responsible for what their parents did and their ancestors did before.
My parents weren't racists.
But
we were poor.
But you all have benefited and been placed in a privileged position beyond black people.
You're right. When I was
historical
working
discriminatory
full-time all
practices
night
and because
going
of the
to college
historical
at the same time
cheating and robbing
struggling to
of
pay
poor
my
black
bills,
communities.
it was all my privilege that paid everything
Charles,
for me.
your hard work accomplished it. But as a mass of people on the whole, white people as a mass of people was placed in a privileged position because of what was done to black people. This is a fact.
Okay. So what you're arguing is that we should be able to talk holistically about races of people to complain about people talking holistically about races of people. And that's an idiotic conundrum, right? You don't condemn white people as a whole for the white racist, just like you shouldn't condemn black people as a whole for something horrible a black individual did.
Charles,
and you can address systemic problems without new bigotry.
Let me tell you something, Charles. There's a reason why the powers in America want us to talk more about racism than
they want us divided.
1 second. They want us to talk about racism more than classism.
Right.
They never want the people, common people in America, to focus on the issue of classism. Because if you can keep us focused solely on racism as an instrument of division, then we will never focus on classism, which is at the root of discriminatory practices in America. When you have 5% of the American population controlling 85% of America's wealth, That's a crime, brother.
And it's
That's a
really
crime.
less than 1% controlling almost all of it.
That's right. That's
and
a
they
crime,
don't care.
brother.
The Republican Party and the Democratic Party is one party, and it's about creating a new aristocracy.
that's why Trump was
and
so
they
dangerous.
decide who has access
But
to
that's
capitalism.
why Trump was so dangerous.
Well, that's true.
Because when you had a president come before the world, and I'm no Trump fan, but I got to speak facts. When this man came before the country and said to the most richest, powerful people in America, I won't take $1 from you to run for president. I'll take a few dollars from the common people and finance it myself. He was the first American president to say to the financial powers of America, keep your money, I'll run without it. When he did that, he made himself public enemy number one. So what they had to do was demonize his character. What they had to do was demonize his image. And what they had to do was demonize his ignorance on Twitter to get us to focus on the small things and not focus on the big things that corporate dollars had been usurped and set to the side when it came to who would become president.
I will tell you, you surprise me all the time, Quanell, with your intellect, and sometimes we disagree. But I will tell you, the fact that we started with you defending Kamala Harris, talking about equity, and we ended with you defending Donald Trump is amazing, and that's why I enjoy doing this segment with you so much.
I'm defending what is right, brother.
Okay.
I'm defending the facts. That's why people think this January 6th investigation is really to bring Trump into a criminal court. Let me tell you something, brothers and sisters. It's not Trump they really want. They want any voice of dissension. They want any voice that is not politically correct. They want any voice, no matter what your color is, that is exposing the corruption and the hypocrisy in the American government and throughout the world. What many people don't know is defeating Donald Trump was a global effort. Investigate that. See, China had to get him out of office. Even Russia had to get him out of office. North Korea had to get him out of office. Those who were members of the United Nations had to get him out of office because he told them that the United Nations was nothing more than corporate welfare, and now you countries that have been a part of it all these decades, you got to pay your debt and pay your bills now. That meant, when he was talking like that and doing that, he went after the financial institutions of the world. When he put tariffs on China like that and said we must have an equal economic exchange of business, and told Russia that we would now cut off your pipelines. Look, man, this is not about no damn fool on Twitter making statements on Twitter talking silly. This is about this man was attempting to redirect global resources, financial resources, and I would not be surprised if they can't get him in the courtroom. There's a plan to put him in a graveyard.
Well, let's hope that's not true. And, you know, we're a bit politically incorrect, which is why we'll probably never go national, Quanell. But when they come for us, we'll stand together, right?
And they coming, brother. The American mainstream media have been showing some serious protests taking place in Iran because of a young woman, Mahsa Amini, who was not wearing, quote unquote, her hijab, the Islamic scarf that is mandatory for all women to wear in Iran. The morality police arrested her and beat her at the scene. And I believe they saying she died from her wounds in police custody, but police are saying she died of a heart attack. It is quite unfortunate that the morality police would go and beat a woman because she was not wearing a hijab. In Islam, because a woman does not wear a hijab is not justification of why you would beat a woman. And in fact, a woman who's not wearing that hijab, you're just automatically assuming she's Muslim. What if she's not Muslim? We don't infringe our religious beliefs as Muslims on those who are not Muslims. But to beat a woman because she was not wearing a hijab, something is wrong with that. But in the Western media, they're calling for Iran to have sanctions placed on it by America. They're calling for removal of the Islamic clerics and the morality council, the Islamic morality council in Iran. And I would say this to you, Charles, be very careful, America, judging another nation in how they treat protesters.
Yeah, I don't think that America needs to be careful in its handling of Iran. I think that this is a nation, I know many Americans now who fled the authoritarian regime there. It is a nation steeped in history. You find the roots of geometry and science in that part of the world. And it just 30, 40 years ago, it was a beautiful country filled with wonderful people that was on the cutting edge of thought that also happened to be predominantly Muslim. And then extremism took over. And there are many bigots that want to paint, Islamophobes, that want to paint a portrait of the Muslim faith as just the radical extremist violence. But of course, the Muslim religion is the largest religion in the world. And much like Christianity goes from Jehovah's Witnesses and Latter-day Saints all the way to Catholicism, there's a wide breadth of denominations in that faith. And in fact, a lot of the violence in the Middle East is intra-faith violence between different types, different sects of that religion. But here, she was arrested for, the conditions, the misogyny, and a lot of people hold off on talking about the misogyny in countries like Iran because they don't want to come across as Islamophobic. But that country it treats women horribly. They treat women like second-class citizens. You see the same thing in Saudi Arabia and other nations.
You don't see it here in America?
Not to that extreme,
America
right?
is
and
no
in
better.
fact, in America, we criticize it and talk about it openly.
America is no better.
But in the Middle East, when you talk about Muslim nations, the mainstream media seems to want to put on kid gloves and talk about it delicately. And with state-sponsored misogyny is horrible. The way women are treated in Iran is horrible. And this young lady just didn't cover her hair, and it wasn't just a beating there. They arrested her, beat her, sent her to a re-education camp where she was beaten to death, and it's disgusting. But these protests here that aren't getting the attention.
Let
Go
me show you the hypocrisy of America. As though the American government and the American people have the moral position to speak about how another country treats its protesters. First of all, when black people were protesting Trayvon Martin, a young black male who was murdered in his own neighborhood for just having Arizona tea and some Skittles, and his killer was found not guilty by an all-white jury in Florida. And we protested. We went to the streets, and black protesters all over America were beaten by cops, pepper sprayed by cops, arrested unjustly by cops. And doing some of these protests of the Michael Brown shooting and some of these protests of Eric Garner and George Floyd, many black people and non-black people were pepper sprayed, were beaten and arrested by Minnesota cops, Florida cops, and you even agreed and was willing to help some of those for free who had been arrested. So the very beatings that we watched taking place in Iran against protesters, that same exact thing has been happening right here in America. So let's not pretend like America has the moral compass to judge another nation. And here's the even bigger hypocrisy. China has most favored nation trade status with America. And the human rights violations in China make Iran's violations look like child's play, but you don't see the American government saying a damn thing about China.
Okay, so I'll try to unpack everything that you just talked about. Firstly, right now, our relationship with China, I will agree, is disgusting. They're running genocide camps that are targeting people of the Muslim faith, and it is the exact same thing that the Nazis did to the Jews in Germany. They're literally exterminating human beings, and we are doing nothing about it. Nothing about it because of greed and money and our cowardly Biden administration. But frankly, the Republican administration that preceded it and all the Democrat and Republican administrations before them did nothing to stand up to China. And I will agree with you, it's absolutely disgusting. But to suggest that America and Americans don't have the ability to be critical of Iran
said the moral authority.
Okay. Well, we do have the moral authority because we have protected
not.
rights in this country, and we have the ability. Women are free here. Now, we could do better on systemic issues, not just for the pay disparity and everything, but people are free in America. And when you talk about the protests, right, I do agree that here in Houston, you had a number of people arrested during the George Floyd protests for mere presence. And you're right, I did represent about 50 of them pro bono, ended up getting all the cases dismissed because I think Kim Oggs, they did the right thing early on, and the ones they didn't, I fought tooth and nail. But conversely, you also had cities and police departments standing down while we called mostly peaceful protests, which actually turned into riots where people were sexually assaulted, raped, businesses were burnt to the ground, and nothing was done. Rioting and violence is not protest. It's not protected speech, and our government still needs to do its job.
But
and they really broke the
Dr. King
contract.
said that rioting is a result of the voiceless never being heard. He said rioting is the result of people so depraved of justice to where they lose their mental stability to rationalize good over wrong because they have reached a mental state of anger and insanity because of injustice. America sits at the forefront of injustice against protesters. That's nothing new. But let me tell you some Muslims in Iran. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that a nation can rise no higher than its woman. How you treat women, Muslims in Iran, Allah is going to judge you for your great disrespect and devaluing of a woman. Let me tell all you psychologically backwards raised Muslims who are in Iran claiming to be scholars. The question was raised, Charles, to Muhammad. Who do we honor first in the home? Our father? He said, no, your mother. Then they said, and who next? He said, your mother. They said, now who, dear holy prophet? He said, your mother. Then he said, now who? He said, your father. He said the mother 3 times. But he said, honor the father. That is the sacred value of women in Islam. But most of you morality police officers in Iran, you can't even read. Because I know you have not read the Holy Quran, the Sunnah of Muhammad, the Hadith of Muhammad, Rasulullah, peace be upon him, to where you would even beat a woman like that because she's not wearing a hijab. What about you hypocrite men over there that are doing things that are un-Islamic and against the rule of Islam, the rule of Islam and the rule of Allah? So, man, don't come to us about a woman is worthy to be beat because she's not wearing a headpiece. You wrong as hell and you know better.
Again, I'll try to unpack everything before you cut me off again. Firstly, I would agree with you. It's horrifying what's going on in Iran. But when you try to rationalize violence that destroys lives, including a great number of people of color, especially like in Minneapolis, you had African-American businesses burned. You saw in St. Louis, the African-American officer was killed off duty, trying to protect a business. You had horrible things happen. And it wasn't happening because of freedom. It was happening because criminals saw an opportunity to commit crimes because the police were standing down and not doing anything. And they usurped the voice of protest. You had people that were legitimately out there calling for systemic paradigmatic change in American policing who lost their voice to violent criminals. And our police should just be solely focused on victimizers and locking them up, but we can't rationalize away destruction or violence because it's a crime and it's horrible and there are victims.
American history, Charles.
Okay, but I'm talking about today, right? I'm talking about the present day. Charles, what you want to do is engage in presentism and try to talk about the viewpoint of today from yesterday.
Today was built from yesterday.
Crime is the victim, crime is never.
And determine on what we do today. Look, how many black people have died when white people protest? Right here in Houston, in 4th Ward, Camp Logan, a whole regiment of black military soldiers were murdered and executed without even going to court or having a trial because they got into a riot fighting in the Houston Police Department on behalf of a black woman that was being beaten by white HPD cops. And they took all of those brothers and court-martialed them at night when never told their families, never gave them lawyers, never gave them a trial, and they murdered all of those brothers and the military brothers in 4th Ward right here in Houston. So wait, what about Tulsa, Oklahoma? What about Arkansas? What about Rosewood, Florida, when white people get angry and they riot? When white people get angry, it's a historical fact. When they riot, thousands of black people have been murdered.
I get that you want to talk about anything but the misogyny in Iran, and I know there were horrible things.
Here too.
There were horrible things that happened in this country, and there are horrible things that continue to happen in this country. But your effort to try to rationalize violent crime that occurred over as an aspect of stealing the voices of protesters is awful. It's disgusting. The people that burnt cities and destroyed cities are evil criminals, and a lot of them got away with it without any consequence. We had so many murders that weren't investigated, all downstream because of the police not doing their job. And I will tell you, I don't like police arresting protesters. It's a violation of the Constitution. I'll fight for those people. I'm not going to fight for people, and you shouldn't be advocating for the people that did horrifying things and used protest as an excuse.
I do not.
And in Iran, what's going on and what's gone on since the Ayatollah and the extremism took over is women are treated less than human. It's still the case in Saudi Arabia, but because of oil, we don't care. But it's at its very worst in Iran. And right now, this week, the mainstream media, because they don't want to be seen as Islamophobes, and while they can knock down and tear down Christians all over the mainstream media all the damn time, we are sitting silent. You're seeing no stories about
when
students
black
being murdered,
protesters protest.
students being killed,
But
students being arrested. They're shooting students with paintballs. They're doing all this because
the same
students are
damn
protesting.
thing happened right here in America to black protesters when we
do
protest.
not, in
but
2022 America,
I disagree with
you
black
are not
people
seeing
protest
people
an
just
element
shoot
of
students
our community
while the media is
who are
silent.
criminals join on to the protest and participate in criminal conduct and criminal acts in the name of a righteous protest. Those brothers and sisters who do that should be condemned, and you're not a part of a legitimate protest fighting for equality with black people in America. But
just a minute ago, you were explaining it.
The same thing that we're pointing fingers at other countries for shooting paintballs and pepper spray balls.
They're shooting
the
bullets.
Same thing happened right here. We just had cops who were indicted, and some of them are still waiting to go to trial right there in Austin, Texas, for the crimes they committed against black protesters and good white protesters too. They committed absolute criminal acts against them, and they're still waiting to go to trial in Austin, Texas right now today. Don't tell me about the wickedness of America and her hypocrisy.
If you want to
judge
that,
another nation's
in Austin,
protesting.
you had violent rioting, and you had officers being directed to use less
Well, it's
than
not
lethal.
violent in Iran?
Less than
It's
lethal.
not violent in Iran?
They were not actually.
How you know?
Because
How you know?
I've researched the issue extensively.
But guess
and you
what?
have to dig
The
deep because their media.
the
They were
government saying they are violating.
they were literally just walking to the subway station
That's
to
what
walk
the
out of
narrative
campus.
is of some.
No, there's videos.
Let me tell you something, Charles. Beating protesters is wrong. I don't care where it's at. But
how about
I'm
killing
telling
protesters?
You, killing them is wrong, exactly. And so let me say, before we start with Iran, let's start with America's hypocrisy.
Okay.
She's the #1 killer of protesters.
When you talk
Look at her
about
history.
when you talk about these Austin officers,
look at her history.
You would talk about these Austin officers. They use less than lethal, and they're looking at aggravated
now you're
assault.
trying to rationalize their brutality
No.
and their criminal behavior.
I'm not
when the
trying to
Austin prosecutor made a decision that they committed felony acts.
Okay. Again, we're talking about Iran. I know you don't want to talk about Iran because you don't want to. You're just like the mainstream media. You're afraid that if we have this robust conversation about the horrifying realities of the existence in Iran for women because of this extremism in the Muslim faith, that maybe it's some sort of criticism of the faith. But I'm not criticizing the faith. I know wonderful Muslim people. They're wonderful. But the extremists, those that are violent, those that think women are somehow subhuman, they need to be called out. And the mainstream media needs to be, both America needs to sanction that country. You don't think they do. And we all needed to be talking about students being killed just for using their voices.
Could you imagine if another country said that she was going to file sanctions against the United States government for her mistreatment and brutal killing of black people in this country at the hands of killer cops and unarmed black men, women being murdered by these cops? And when we protest because how we are treated, other countries decided to place sanctions on America. America wouldn't tolerate it. So why in the hell would somebody else tolerate America doing it to them when America's the biggest hypocrite when it comes to how you handle protesters? Let me tell you something. You know why the media won't talk about Iran? Because Iran ain't selling no oil to America. Saudi Arabia makes Iran's treatment of women look like child's play. Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest human rights violators against women's rights. But yet, you don't see America talking about that. You see Mr. Biden going over there with his hat in his hand, acting like Stephen Fetchit, begging for some oil from the damn killer terrorist prince who kills citizens on other nations' foreign soil and execute him and never apologize for it. Hell, he had a reporter murdered and butchered and body cut up in an Iranian embassy in another country. And Biden go right over there and say, we're going to talk about it. Then when he get there, say, we didn't talk about it. Give me some oil. What hypocrites we are in America. And why we don't talk about what's going on in China? Because everything we got in America is made in China. And they make women's and human rights violations look like child's play. I agree with you. Genocide is taking place right now in China against a religion. But yeah, you don't hear American media talking about that.
You know, I agree with you when you talk about the hypocrisy of the Biden administration and the cowardice of the Biden administration. I am in full agreement with you. But when you say that America doesn't have the moral authority, there are a great number of things we need to work on in this country, and we need to constantly push this country forward to make it better and more free. But we're still the best in the game, and we need to do it. This is still a country where you can come with nothing and work your ass off and make a beautiful life for you and your family by hard work. And there are many people that want to convince people, oh, you can't win. The system, you just can't win. But that's not true here. You can win in America, and we have to be the line leaders. We have to be the voices that demand change. But it's politically incorrect to criticize those aspects of the Muslim faith. It's politically incorrect to criticize Iran. The mainstream media just wants to attack Israel and America, and to hell with everything else. But I'm here criticizing Iran. What that country's government does to its own people, and makes them especially to its own women, the killing of students that's going on is disgusting. And we all need to say, hey, media, cover it. Hey, media, this is awful. Hey, we need to demand change, because we need a better world, not a worse world.
But to push the lie that everybody in America can win.
Oh, well, certainly. If you work hard enough, you can get ahead in America. You can in many parts of Western Europe. You can in almost the rest of the world. There's a reason people die to get to this country, and it's not the portrait you paint.
Poor white people, poor black people, poor brown people, and poor Asians know that in this country,
I was a poor white person.
A few of us will
and I worked my heart.
A few of us
I worked my ass off and didn't sleep for 10, 15 years.
Of us in to make it look like we all can win. But America is a system based on the haves and have-nots. The system is based on the rich getting richer and the poor getting poor. They will sell us the illusion of inclusion in economic prosperity in America, that we all can win. A few of us will be allowed to let through of every race to sell the lie to the masses. But the American economic system is not built for everybody to win.
You know, when we leave here, you're going to go get in that $100,000 car. It looks like you got a wash. It's looking beautiful there in that parking lot, and you are winning. And it is awful to try to convince other Americans that you can't win, right? Because then people give up and they don't have hope. We need hope. You need to bust your ass, go to school, get educated, start a business, and make that money.
Why are you white folks so fascinated with what I drive?
Well, you're acting like you can't win in America. You're winning. I know you. You're rich. You do great. Money, and you're telling
when I get my hair cut or when I get my shoes shined. I just want to say,
I'm glad you're winning,
bless your
Quanell.
heart. But I want to tell my brothers and sisters, if I as an individual am winning, no one man, according to Fannie Lou Hamer, and also Dr. Francis Quest Wilson, that said the same thing, no one man or woman can rise above the condition of the masses of his or her people. So the individual success of an individual would never supersede the total condition of the mass of the people that I come from. So I don't give a damn about the classes. It's the masses that must have the right to succeed in this country.
And I want to continue to encourage the masses to seek education, seek opportunity, and work hard, because you can win in America. Everyone can win if you work hard enough.
What they are selling in America in the name of education today is miseducation. The founder
our education system is broken, but that's not today. We're still better than Iran. We still have the moral authority to criticize Iran.
Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Black history in America, said that Harvard ruined more good Negroes than bad whiskey. So the education system we have in America right now is a system that teaches children to think like robots and just pass tests. But creative thinking, ingenuity, spiritual thinking, moving forward with science, with creative thought process, that's out the window. Hell, a teacher can't even tell a child the truth today without being suspended and terminated. That ain't real education in America. What we got is a system, I agree with you, that has failed. The public school system in America is a disgrace. When you look at the amount of money we pay per child and where we fall on the global sphere of academic excellence, it's a crime.
Well, I agree.